So at this point we have our articles API working. Now we would introduce users API, which will be used only by admins, so only admin users will be able to access these endpoints later, with one exception, one public endpoint, which will be used to create new users. With that being said, let's open up IntelliJ. Again, we will start everything with model, so let's click on the model package, right mouse button, new, Kotlin class/file, and let's add a new class called user. Right here I would like to specify 4 fields: ID, email, password, and role. ID again will be UUID. Email will be a string value. Please note that all of them are non-nullable. Val password will be string value, and val role, I would like this to be a role enum, which I'll add below. Enum class role, and I would like this to contain 2 values, either user or admin. So as we can see, we'll have either admins or standard users in our application later. Additionally, this class contains email and password, which will be extensively used when dealing with our JWT tokens later. With that done, let's implement user repository. So let's click on the repository package, new, Kotlin class/file, and call it user repository. Again, we must annotate that with some component annotation, so I can use the repository from Spring. This time I would like to introduce 3 users, some standard users, and 1 admin. So again, this will be a dummy database in the form of a list, but this time this will be a mutable list so that later we'll be able to add new users from our API. Private val users equals mutable list of, and right here let's specify a bunch of users. So the first one, user. Let's make sure to import the correct one, because like we can see there is also a user class inside Spring framework. Nevertheless, let's import ID equals UUID, random UUID, email equals, let's say, email-1@gmail.com. For the password, let's specify pass1, password equals pass1. For the role, as I mentioned, let's start, for example, with role user. Colon. Let's copy that, Ctrl+C, and let's specify 2 more users. Let's remember to update email and maybe password as well, 3, and the user 2, let's make an admin user. Ctrl+Alt-L, and wonderful, we have our dummy database. Following, I would like to add a bunch of methods like save, find by email, find all, find by UID, and delete by UID. So let's start with the first one, the save method. This one will be expecting the argument of type user and simply adding the user to our list. So fun save user of type user. It will be returning the boolean type because the add method returns boolean users add, and simply add our user. Nextly, let's introduce the find by email method, which will take the email string argument. Find by email string value, and this will return user or null. So we must specify the nullable user type, and users dot first or null it dot email equals the email provided as a parameter. Following, let's add find all method. Find all list user equals users, simply exposing our users. Following, let's add find by a UID find by UID of type UUID. Similarly, user nullable type equals, and this time just like we did with email, users dot first or null it ID ID equals UUID. Lastly, let's add a function responsible for deleting users. If it finds the user, it should delete the user and return a Boolean flag indicating whether this was successful. So, fun delete by UUID, again UUID argument, and as I mentioned, a Boolean flag. This time the first thing I would like to do will be to find the user, so val found user equals find by UUID, and let's specify the UUID. And lastly, so if we found the user, we would like to remove it. So let's go return found user let. So this block will be invoked only if the user is not null. And what I would like to do will be to simply remove this item from the users list. So users, let me scroll down a bit, dot remove, and let's specify it as this item. Otherwise, we would like to return false. So this function will return true only if the user was found and was deleted. Otherwise, it was not found, it will return false. And additionally, this function remove similarly returns a Boolean. So if the element is not removed, then it also will return false. So let's summarize quickly. We have our dummy database, we have our functions. Unfortunately, at this point we store our password in a plain text, but don't worry, we'll get back to this topic too later. And with all of that done, we must add the service layer. So let's click on the service package, new, we did that already, class, and call it user service. I'll annotate firstly that with service annotation, and similarly we need to inject our repository, private val user repository. Following, we will add 4 functions: create user, find by UUID, find all, and delete by UUID, which will be used in our controller. So the first one, fun create user. It will take user as the argument, user not equals, let's open up a block, and the first thing I would like to do will be to find the user. So val found equals user repository, find by email, user dot email. If the user is not found, then it's good, we would like to create a new one and we would like to save that. Otherwise, we will simply return null. So return if found equals null, then I would like to simply call user repository save user and return the saved user. Otherwise, let's return null, else null. Ctrl-Alt-L to format the code, and let's introduce the next method, find by UUID. Find by UUID of type UUID. Again, user type nullable equals user repository, find by UUID, and let's simply pass this argument. Again, we are simply adding a service layer so that in the future this structure will be more extensible. As the next one, I would like to add find by all. Find by all, and this one will return a list of users. List users, and I would like to call simply the find all method. User repository find all. Lastly, we'll delete by UUID. Delete by UUID. Of course, it will take the UUID as the argument and will return a Boolean flag indicating if the delete operation was successful. User repository, simply I will again invoke the method passing the argument which I get here. Nothing spectacular here, we have 4 functions, so we can move to the next step. And as the next step, I would like to introduce user request and user response. So let's click on the controller package, right mouse button, new package. Let's delete the article so that we do not create this new package inside the article package, but rather inside the controller one, and call it user. We can see we have a new package here, and let's add a user request, Kotlin class. Data class, this will be a good example which will show the request and response will differ from the actual model. user request. Right here, val email, string value, and password, again, string value. Similarly, let's add user response. Right mouse button, new, data class, user response. And right here, I would like to specify two fields, UUID and email. We don't want to share the password from our model, never. So val UUID of type UUID and val email of string value. Ctrl-Alt-L to format the code. And with that done, we can create user controller. So right mouse button again on our package, Kotlin class, user controller. Again, we'll start with REST controller and we'll provide a request mapping. Request mapping. This time this will be API/user. Oh, sorry, singular form. The next thing I need to do will be simply inject the service, private val user service and the user service type. The first endpoint I would like to add will be the post endpoint, which will be used to create users. So post mapping, fun, create. It will take the user request as a parameter. So I must annotate that with request body, so that Spring Framework will deserialize the JSON sent to our endpoint into the user request instance. So user request of type user request, and as a response, I would like to return user response equals. So as the first thing, let's invoke the user service create user method. User service create user, and we will firstly specify the user, but we must map our user request to model. We saw that in previous videos, so again I'll create an extension function for our user request class. Private fun user request. Firstly, we must specify the class for which we create the extension function, the name of the function to model, and I would like this one to return user as the model. Again, just please keep in mind to import the correct user, not the one from the Spring Framework package, because it sometimes happens and may be hard to debug later what's going on. This toModel function will generate our random UUID, we'll set the email and password, and by default we'll set the role user. So equals user ID equals UUID random UUID. As the email, let's simply set this.email. The same for password equals this.password. And for the role, I would like to specify user by default. Role.user. Excellent, but our create user function returns model found user. We would like to return user response. So we need to do two things. Firstly, if it is not null, then let's map to response. We'll add similar function to model. And if this is not the case, then I would like to return bad request. For example, we will throw simply the exception. Let's get back here. Private fun user model and to response. I would like this function to return user response type. Response type equals and new instance of user response. As we remember, this one has two fields, this ID, and the second field was email. So email equals this email. Ctrl-Alt-L. We can see that this is almost perfect. Right here, dot to response. Now let's see what's going on. Found nullable type, we require non-nullable type. So as I mentioned, we will throw the exception. To be more specific, I would like to throw the response status exception, which by Spring will be translated to appropriate status code in our APIs. So go with throw response status exception. I remember the times that this was not added to Spring and you had to annotate your custom exceptions with status codes, but this one is actually useful and helps you to spare some time here. The first argument, we have a bunch of constructors that we can invoke here. I will show you the one that expects the HTTP status and the message. So let's start HTTP status org.spring framework HTTP bad request, and I would like to specify some message. Cannot create user. Cannot create a user dot. Now we can see that the code will compile. So with that done, let's introduce the rest of the endpoints, and after that I will show you how to create Postman collection for that. So the next endpoint I would like to do will be the get endpoint, which will be used to list all users. Get mapping from list all. I would like this to return a list of user response. User response equals user service dot find by all. I must get back there and let's change the name. Shift plus F6 find all. This way, when you rename a function, it will be renamed in all occurrences. Anyway, the next thing I would like to do will be to call map, because this is a list, and simply for each item, I would like to invoke to response. Excellent. The next endpoint I would like to add will be find by UUID. This time we will map path variable to the function parameter. So let's learn head mapping and let's provide slash curly brackets UUID fun find by UUID, and right here we'll specify the path variable annotation and the name of the parameter. With Spring, when you annotate path variable and the name of our placeholder here and our argument right here match, then the Spring will automatically map the value from the request to the parameter passed to our function. Again, find by UUID should return user response equals, and I'll invoke user service find by UUID and provide this value. If it is found, then I would like to map it to response. Otherwise, we will again throw the exception. So let's simply copy this value, but this time instead of bad request, I would like to return not found, cannot find a user. Lastly, we will add the delete endpoint. Similarly, it will take the path variable delete mapping. Argument will be placeholder UUID. Delete by UUID. Path variable UUID of type UUID, and I would like this function to simply return a boolean. So as the return type, I'll go with response entity boolean, for example, and let's open up a block. So firstly, let's read the flag whether the user was deleted successfully. Val success equals user service delete by UUID, and let's forward this UUID. Lastly, if this is successful, I would like to return the no content status without anybody. Return if success response entity no content, and we must invoke build. Otherwise, I would like to again throw the exception, exactly the same as in the previous function, cannot find a user. Also, and let's simply copy this value. Let's select it right here, Ctrl plus Alt L, and at this point we have our API working. In the following lessons, you will learn that this one will be publicly available because I would like to allow everyone to create a new user, but only admins should be able to list all users, find by UUID, and delete by UUID in our API design. With that done, let's open up Postman once again. So maybe let's copy this. Let's click it, Ctrl plus C, Ctrl plus V. Let's click on it, I would like to call it get all users. Get all users /API/user. Let's hit enter and we will see that we cannot connect. So as the next step, we must get back to IntelliJ and run the application because I forgot to do that. So let's click on the green icon right here. Alternatively, you can use Shift plus F10 as a shortcut. Again, we can see that app is running, so let's get back to Postman. Ctrl plus S, I would like to save this request, and now hit send. Ctrl plus enter. Wonderful, we can see 3 users created in our application. Let's copy this one, Ctrl plus C, Ctrl plus V, get user by ID. That's the another endpoint, get user by ID. And what I would like to pass here will be, for example, this UID, and we should get only this user. If it is found, then we get 200 OK and the user response. If I change the value to some random C1, for example, we should get 404 not found. We don't see the message. By default, the messages are not included in the payload in Spring Boot. And this all indicates that the endpoint is working as expected. I can save this one. Following, we would like to add almost exactly the same endpoint, but this one with delete HTTP method. Let's copy that. Delete user by ID. Let's change to delete here. Ctrl plus S. First, let's check if the user exists. Exists. Excellent. So I should get 204 node content, and this is correct because we deleted successfully. Now when I get all users, I should not see this user anymore, which again shows that it's working fine. Now when I try to hit delete endpoint once again, we can see that the user was not found, which indicates that everything is working fine so far. What I would like to do lastly will be to add a new user. So let's hit Ctrl plus C for get all users because it will have the same path. Let's change to path, create user, and as this is the post endpoint, we must specify some body, row, text, JSON, and right here specify the request body. If we remember, the user requests allowed us to specify only 2 fields, email and password. So email, some email, gmail.com, password. The password should be some passiel123. Let's hit send. Wonderful. If I try once again, we can see the bot request because the user is already created for that email, which is a simple validation. Of course, there are a bunch of other cases that you should take care of in the real life scenario, but wanted to add at least some basic validation. Now, let's hit save. Let's get all users and just verify that it exists. And we can see that there is a new entity, some email. So again, we can see that our API is working correctly, and if you would like to get this Postman collection ready to go, Postman collection that you can import to your PC, just visit my blog and you will find that in the article. And that's all for this video, and in the next one we'll start finally importing our Spring Security and working with JWT tokens. So see you in the next one.